Ukraine and Russia have ended their first talks since war broke out 5 days ago without any breakthrough. A Ukrainian delegate says the negotiations were difficult. And the meeting was held in Belarus, close to the Ukrainian border. The talks began later than planned and lasted 6 hours. But despite Ukraine's hopes for a ceasefire and a Russian withdrawal, there was no agreement. Now, major cities, including the capital, Kyiv, are still holding out, but there's no let-up in the fighting. Our next report takes you to Ukraine, but a warning that it does contain disturbing images.
The brutality of this conflict, in plain sight. Medics say the people here were injured as Russian troops shelled the port city of Mariupol. One of them, a 6-year-old girl, doesn't make it. Yet another pointless loss of life. Russia says it's not targeting civilians. But pictures such as these, which Ukraine says is a residential building in flames in the northern town of Chernihiv, seem to disprove that claim. As do these satellite images showing craters caused by Russian artillery fire near residential areas in the city of Kharkiv in the east. Ukrainians say they will do all it takes to defend their country. As civilians learn how to become soldiers, Ukraine's foreign minister makes clear the extent of his resolve that they will never give up. He also had this appeal to people in Russia.
I would like to address the citizens of the Russian Federation. Look what Vladimir Putin turned your country, your big country, into. He declared an invasive war against Ukraine. He sent here your sons, husbands, to kill Ukrainians, capture our lands, destroy our cities. Ukrainians did not want this war, but they will fight for their land and their homes.
Back in Mariupol, residents are sheltering from the fighting in an underground gym. Many have been here for 5 days. Despite what is happening outside, some are trying to be optimistic. There's hope for peace negotiations because everyone wants peace and some kind of result so that civilians aren't being killed. We're the majority here. For now, though, there is no peace. And this is the new reality for the millions of Ukrainians who just last week were leading normal lives.
Some of the heaviest fighting has been in Ukraine's second largest city, Kyiv. Ukrainian authorities say dozens of people were killed and hundreds injured when Russian forces fired on residential areas. The Emergencies Ministry released this footage showing flames and thick plumes of smoke rising from apartment blocks. Authorities say the casualties could be higher because the damage from Monday's shelling of residential areas is still being assessed. And I want to bring in Yevgeny Varva. He is a Ukrainian musician, also known as Zekar Koshma. He has fled Kharkiv and is now on the other side of the country in Lviv. And I want to welcome him to DW News and thank him very much for joining us. So you have fled across the country, but you still have many contacts who are in Kharkiv. What are they telling you about what they are experiencing there?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to the show. I just had a conversation with my guitar player who actually is still staying in Kharkiv. Today's news. We have several districts in Kharkiv completely destroyed. We have high-rises brought down. We have numerous people killed. They went to get some food. They went to get some medicine, but they were staying in lines. Of course, there's a big shortage in supplies for civilians, of course, so we have lines. So at that very moment, Russia committed what they committed.
So you have managed to escape that situation from there. Can I ask you how you personally made it to Lviv?
I made it by car. We live in the center of the city. Me and my wife woke up at 4:30 in the morning from explosions and sounds of explosions. And we did see that with our own eyes. And then I have very old mama, and she barely walks. I also have a kid who actually managed to break his leg 2 months ago.
Oh my
So
goodness.
in that situation, I made a very quick decision. I jumped into the car. I picked up my mother from Pavlovo Pole, which is the district now being attacked, and there's a lot of buildings destroyed right now with civilians. So I jumped in the car, picked my mom. We put whatever was brought into our minds. We packed the car and we went. I drove up to Lviv for about 3 days. We slept in shelters. Actually, across the country, it's very, very impressive how people from different cities help people from different cities. So everybody is trying to help those people who are
I'm
actually...
so glad you've been able to
yeah.
bring your family safely with you across the country. I just want to ask how the situation in Lviv, where you've arrived, compares to what you left behind.
It's more quiet, but we are staying in a hotel, which was actually provided by a company I work for. I work for IT company P2H. So the company supported the employees, and they rented a hotel for several, 30 or 40 people right now, whoever had the possibility to actually reach to Lvov. And be here for about 2 weeks now. I have to make a decision. Obviously,
what comes next.
Living in the hotel business. Yeah, so I have to rent an apartment. I have a lot of things to do.
Well, we wish you the best of luck with the steps that do come next. Thanks for speaking to us under these really difficult circumstances. The Ukrainian musician, Yevgeny Varva in Lviv. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we can speak now with David Shtulik, formerly with the EU delegation in Kyiv and now with Kremlin Watch, investigating Russian influence and disinformation operations against Western democracies. A warm welcome to the show. I want to ask you first about the talks today between Russia and Ukraine that took place in Belarus. They ended with no major breakthrough. Does that mean that there is any chance going forward for a diplomatic resolution to this conflict?
I think that now both sides are going to stick to their initial positions. I mean, Russians are requesting Ukrainians to completely surrender, to demilitarize the country, to abandon their European and NATO-related ambitions. And this is something which is absolutely unacceptable for Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians are going to bravely defend their own country, their own sovereignty. And I think that Russia would put even more military pressure now on Ukraine, and they will try to put them, literally speaking, on the knees, and then the talks might kind of resume. So this is a scenario that Ukrainians don't want to.
So you do expect to see more military pressure, despite the fact that we've seen unprecedented Western sanctions that appear to be starting to bite. I mean, surely the Kremlin must be feeling the pressure there.
Of course they are. I mean, we've seen today the turbulent development on the capital markets. The thing, there was a huge devaluation of a ruble, Russian currency. But this is not still, I would say, a kind of a decisive game changer that would force Russians to also make certain concessions. I think that we would rather see another attempt to escalate the whole situation. And as long as these sanctions really don't kind of, hurt the whole economy of Russia, I think that President Putin will further escalate and will use more and more military means and military power against Ukraine.
Now, a group of Eastern EU states have backed Ukraine's request to actually join the EU. You previously were with the EU delegation in Kyiv. So in your experience, how likely do you think that is?
What is more likely than the acceptance of the Ukrainian application for the EU membership is that the EU would eventually and finally grant Ukrainian the membership perspective. That has been on the table since 2013. The EU was always very reluctant to provide Ukraine with this perspective. But under the current circumstances, I think it's more likely that the EU 27 member states are going to give Ukraine this perspective, because for the EU membership, the EU has its own formal criteria. There are certain procedures, and what Ukrainians have asked for, they have asked for some sort of a fast-track, approach. So this is something that I don't think some member states would accept. But still, I talked today to some Ukrainian officials, and they said that if you want to get something, you have to always ask for more. So I guess this is a part of their kind of a negotiation strategy.
David Strulik, formerly with the EU delegation in Kyiv and now with Kremlin Watch, thanks so much for coming on to the program.
Thank you, and have a good evening.
Now, the United Nations opened an emergency session of its General Assembly with a minute's silence for those killed during Russia's invasion of Ukraine. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warned Russia that the fighting must stop, and he had strong words for its president, Vladimir Putin, after he put his nuclear forces on high alert.
We are facing a tragedy for Ukraine, but also a major regional crisis with potentially disastrous implications for us all. Yesterday, Russian nuclear forces were put on high alert. This is a chilling development. The mere idea of a nuclear conflict is simply inconceivable. Nothing can justify the use of nuclear weapons.
And to talk more about this emergency session of the UN General Assembly, I can now welcome Richard Walker. He's our chief international editor. Richard, this session is still ongoing. What do we know has been happening so far?
Yeah, well, powerful words there from Antonio Guterres opening this very unusual meeting. There have only been 10 sessions of the UN General Assembly of this kind ever. We heard that warning from him on Vladimir Putin's threat surrounding nuclear weapons. And Guterres saying, at this point, enough is enough. There's been so much violence already, civilians are suffering, that it's really time for this to finish already. We also heard from the Ukrainian ambassador, maybe we can talk about that in a moment. The Russian ambassador went through many of the talking points that we've heard from Vladimir Putin about how this is all the fault of the Ukrainians and pointing the finger also at the West. And it was also interesting to see the Chinese ambassador, who gave a very short and low-key intervention. The Chinese position has been really interesting to watch because they're trying to sort of straddle almost two rather conflicting positions. On the one hand, they're trying to support the line of Russia, which has become increasingly friendly with China in recent years, and particularly even in recent weeks. Those two countries seeing very much eye to eye that they want to push back against the United States. But on the other hand, China having to admit that it sticks to its principles, that the territorial integrity of sovereign states, which Ukraine is, cannot be damaged, cannot be infringed upon. So the Chinese ambassador trying to walk the line between those positions, but also saying that they really welcome that these talks, at least, are happening between the Ukrainians and the Russians.
And Richard, you mentioned that the Ukrainian ambassador also gave a powerful statement. I just want to see if we can pull up a clip of what he had to say.
If Ukraine does not survive, international peace will not survive. If Ukraine does not survive, the United Nations will not survive. Have no illusions. If Ukraine does not survive, we cannot be surprised if democracy fails next. Now we can save Ukraine, save the United Nations, save democracy, and defend the values we believe in.
So, Richard, that's really a heartfelt plea from the Ukrainian ambassador. But do you expect we will see the international community stand by Ukraine and against Russia's invasion and aggression?
Well, I mean, we've already seen one vote taking place in the UN system at the UN Security Council a couple of days ago. That has 15 members. The vote went 11 votes criticizing Russia, one vote on Russia's side, Russia's own vote.
Surprise, yeah.
And 3 abstentions. So that was already a sign that Russia is looking isolated. Of course, this now opens up in this session of the General Assembly to all 193 member states. So it's going to be very interesting to see the degree of isolation that Russia experiences there, particularly as it opens up beyond the sort of power centers of the Security Council to the entire world. So I think the supporters of this resolution criticising Russia will certainly want to have more than 100 votes criticising Russia's position. But we'll have to see. It could be tomorrow that the vote actually takes place. It could even be as far through the week as Wednesday.
And if they do get that broad support that they want and that they expect, what will the actual implications be for Russia?
Well, here's the difference between a vote in the UN General Assembly and a vote in the UN Security Council. If a resolution had gone through in the Security Council, that would have had legal implications for the Russians. The General Assembly has no such implications, but it would the isolation, if it does come to that, would certainly have moral effects on the Russians.
Our Chief International Editor, Richard Walker, thanks as always for joining me in the studio with that update. And Ukrainian civilians have been helping to resist the invasion. People are collecting donations and gathering supplies for the army. DW correspondent Matthias Bollinger met some of the volunteers helping refugees and soldiers in the city of Vinnytsia, southwest of Kyiv. Now, Poland, meanwhile, is preparing for tens of thousands more migrants to cross its border from Ukraine after fleeing the conflict there. The Polish border guard says nearly 327,000 people have crossed into Poland already, some 73,000 people on Monday alone. Now, people have been streaming across the border since Russia began its invasion of Ukraine. The situation in some places has turned into a humanitarian crisis.
They bring everything they can spare: clothes, food, money. As refugees move west and soldiers east towards the front, here in Vinnytsia and central Ukraine, people are organizing aid for both. Natalia, who doesn't want to give her last name, leads a youth center in peacetime. She's used to organizing outings and summer camps. Now, at war, she's busy directing volunteers and sorting donations. I never imagined I'd be doing any of this. I'm learning all the time. We're improving our work every minute. We are getting there. Vinnytsia in central Ukraine has so far been spared heavy fighting, although air raid alarms are frequent. But like everywhere in the country, people here have been under shock since Russia attacked. Now everyone wants to contribute. A wave of solidarity is running through society. Natalia is out and about around the clock. The nightly curfew is the only time she's not on site. I can't just sit home doing nothing and just waiting. I'm also definitely not leaving. This is our home that we love, and we're not going anywhere. It's not only about donating goods. Many also contribute their time making camouflage nets for the army. Green and brown clothes are separated from the donations and cut into pieces. The rest is a lot of handiwork. The Ukrainian army has been at war for 8 years, still lacking many basic items, including protective equipment. And many here have somebody at the front: a husband, brother, sister, or, in Natalia's case, a 19-year-old son. We are in touch. I can talk to him once a day. It's those few minutes that I'm waiting for all day. Being active is also a way for many here to deal with their worries.
As we've heard, Poland is preparing for tens of thousands of migrants to come across the border from Ukraine. The Polish border guard saying nearly 327,000 people have crossed into Poland already, some 73,000 people just on Monday alone. And people have been coming across the border since Russia began its invasion of Ukraine. The situation in some places has turned into a humanitarian crisis. And DW's correspondent Max Zander is in Poland at the border with Ukraine. Max, hi. What is the situation for Ukrainian refugees who've been arriving there?
Right. So for Ukrainian refugees who made it across the border here to Poland, if one thing has become apparent over the last couple of days is that they are not on their own, no matter how hard the situation here is. The Polish government has preparing for this for days and for weeks and has put a system in place to help these people here. Let's have a look around at where we are here right now. We're in Przemyśl, the border town. A lot of the help that comes here has been carried out by volunteers who hand out donations, as you can see here. People here in Poland, but also people from abroad, have come here too with donations, with food, with diapers, with blankets, warm clothes to brace the cold weather. And as you rightly pointed out, more than 300,000 people are in Poland now. A few more, many more are expected. So all help is needed at the moment.
Absolutely. It looks like a freezing night there. And Max, you touched on the fact that some procedures have been put in place to make crossing the border a bit easier for people coming from Ukraine. I understand the government is also talking about simplifying those further. Can you tell us a bit more about what that looks like?
Right, crossing the border is still very, very difficult. Hundreds of thousands of people are fleeing from violence in Ukraine at the moment. So there are still long lines of cars at the borders that are moving very slowly, where people spend hours, even days in cars trying to reach the border. The train station on the other side in Lviv, the platforms are full of people. People are really having a hard time getting onto those trains. It's become very competitive. Now, one thing what the Ukrainians are doing on the other side to speed up the process is we've been hearing that they're stopping, they are no longer checking the documentations of women and children, and that is hopefully going to speed up the process. Here on the Polish side, this is already the case, that anybody coming from Ukraine can come without having to go through any registration or any administrative process.
And what have you been hearing from the people you've spoken to who have just crossed that border from Ukraine into Poland?
Well, the situations are very different naturally, but what we've been hearing from people we've talked to here, they're all very relieved to finally have made it. People are exhausted, people are tired, and just relieved that they made it here. The first people who came here over the last couple of days mainly were people who had some sort of connections here in Poland amongst the Ukrainian community here. Now we're seeing more and more people who are just fleeing and have no real sense of orientation. So that's one thing that they have to do, like reassess their situation here and see how they continue.
And what can we expect in the coming days as more and more people undoubtedly cross into Poland?
It really depends, and nobody really can answer that question probably. I mean, the situation is evolving very, very quickly. On Sunday alone, we had 100,000 people reaching Poland, and the government is preparing for many more. The Polish Prime Minister said that he was actually moved by the outpouring of help by the Polish people here, and that Poland is doing everything to help the refugees, which is pretty much a 180-degree turn from what we've seen in the past, how Poland was dealing with people fleeing from war. But in this case, the country is determined to take everybody in, as many people as they can, be this 1 million or perhaps many more.
That's an important point there. Our correspondent, Max Zander, thank you so much for your reporting there.